Hey, lovelies. Nicole Bell here, and I'm so excited to have you join me for this season of the Soul Guided Book Club. We're starting a new series where I interview thought leaders and everyday professionals about the books that have made the biggest difference in their lives. If you love conversations like this, I'd love to have you go to www.soulguidedbookclub.com. There you can join in for our live virtual book club sessions on personal finance, spirituality, relationships, fitness, and so much more. If you want to take the concepts from your favorite personal development and spirituality books and actually apply them to your life this year, there's no better place to do it than in supportive community. Join today at www.soulguidedbookclub.com and let's dive in. Hello, hello, and welcome back to the Soul Guided Book Club podcast. I'm your host, Nicole Bell, and today I'm sitting down with Amy Pearson. Amy Pearson is a former approval addict, but now she is a courage infuser. She helps women move out of fear and people-pleasing and into truth, creativity, and real results. A master coach and dream analyst, Amy teaches nervous system-friendly courage practices grounded in the science of consciousness and the work of Dr. David Hawkins. She is the founder of North Star Coach Mentoring and the creator of the Frequency Navigator GPT, which is a reflection tool that helps users identify and shift their energetic states. Today, Amy and I will be discussing The Map of Consciousness Explained by David Hawkins, as well as chatting a little bit more about her work. So Amy, it's so great to see you. Thank you for being here.
Hi, Nicole. Thank you so much for having me.
It's wonderful to have you here. And so, just to share a little bit about our shared experience, you
Mm,
and I had the opportunity to work together years ago when you were coaching Be Brazen. And so, your work has always been really essentially Be Brazen is exactly what it sounds like, that
mm,
concept of being your boldest self, being brazen, having courage. And
mm,
so, you've
mhm.
always played in this space, and your work made a big impact on me. I'm curious what sort of drew you to this particular facet of leadership, courage, and being bold.
So I feel like that's one of the things that I'm sort of good at is being authentic. And I have had feedback that, I've been able to help infuse others with that. And I, as a coach mentor, as someone who's been in the coaching industry and in the spiritual entrepreneurship industry, I guess you would say, space, I just see that a lot of individuals who have this intention to be out there and share their gifts with the world, that the resistance around that, the resistance around being seen, the resistance around fear of what other people might say, quote unquote failure, it really stops people. And I mean, especially now in this chaotic world that we're living in, I can't think of anything more important than people who would consider themselves here to help evolve consciousness to be able to share their light. And so I just feel really interested in how can I really help people to do that. And I have found that the work of David Hawkins and the map of consciousness, and particularly this one energetic state called courage, and talking about that and sharing that has really been my passion.
I love that. And I find that particularly fascinating because I do think that for some people, what they are meant to share is more come from their place of overcoming and triumphing in an area that was particularly challenging for them. We
Mm.
hear about that a lot in the coaching space. But
Hmm.
then, just like you mentioned, for you, sharing from your strength, sharing from something that is almost kind of like you're a field of courage, you're a field of authenticity, that
Right.
is maybe more of a natural state for you, but then looking out into the world and seeing, oh, this is something that people struggle with, and how can I help them with that?
Well, it's definitely been a journey. I would say that for most of my life, I worked really hard to project this facade, right? You've heard me talk about this, just likability, perfection, anything that I could do to extract validation from others. So essentially that I could feel safe. And that became a part of my awareness when I entered into coach training and I started to see that my biggest kind of area of growth was really around this whole dynamic of trying to get people to approve of me. And on the other side of that, trying to get people not to reject me. And so the piece around courage, though, that I think has really served me, and also I think it's also this energy of curiosity, is just what is that about? It's this kind of this like desire to understand what is underneath certain types of patterns of behavior. I think that's what makes me a good coach. And so along that, I guess, path, having a better sense of kind of why I was the way I was and helping then to use that as a way to help other people. So I mean, I guess it's an area of growth, but I think it's just been a journey too, because I think there was also this part of me that wasn't really in the frequency of courage. It was more anchored more into this frequency of what David Hawkins would call desire, which is more that addiction frequency where it's like you're telling yourself, I need these things from the external world so that I can feel whole, so that I can feel safe, so that I can feel good. And also this frequency called pride, which, a lot of times on the surface we think that's a good thing, but in David Hawkins' sense, it's really about feeling good about yourself at the expense of other people. And so I was doing a lot of that and I didn't realize it. I wasn't conscious of it. But luckily, just being able to stay in curiosity and use my tools has allowed me to kind of understand a little bit more about that dynamic and then courageously step into more awareness around it.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And that's very interesting because a couple
Mm.
of things. First of all, yeah, it's like pride is similar to superiority,
Hmm.
where it's the opposite side of the inferiority coin. And
Yeah.
so pride, like you said, it's always putting yourself up at the expense of others. I also think it's interesting that you mentioned because I will say that when you and I connected, I was so drawn and really moved by your history of accomplishments such that I almost didn't even relate to you because you had come from such an accomplished background into the coaching space when I started working with you.
Mm-hmm.
But then you were so forthcoming and in sharing authentically about your own struggles, your own challenges, and that addiction to approval
Yeah.
that I think that's really important to call out because for so many people, they look at others with bright, shiny
Mhm.
lives. And sometimes, of course, that's just a facade, that's just the highlight reel. So I find that to be sort of an interesting dynamic when you look around and again, the comparison trap that so many of us get
Yeah.
ourselves into.
Right. Well, and I definitely had, a lot of that. So, I mean, I was able to appear accomplished on the surface. I'd spent a lot of time chasing achievement. That was my thing. And I was able to learn languages. I was able to get advanced degrees. I was able to work for organizations that people will hold up as prestigious. And so you could take that on the surface and in any number of people, you could see what it is they're projecting on the surface, and you could compare yourself to them, and you could draw the conclusion that somehow you fall short. But what people didn't see about me was that I had a very traumatic childhood where I was born into a family with alcoholic parents who were just in the throes of alcoholism. My mom was basically left me to be cared for by my teenage sisters. There were all kinds of bad things happening in the household. There was all kinds of abuse. It was just an absolute horror show. And so for me, having been born to a mother who was not only kind of dealing with her own addiction, but she was just really just trying to make it work day by day in survival mode. I didn't get, and I was the fourth child. So it was like I didn't get a lot of attention. I was kind of someone, I was a kid that what really felt like I was kind of in the way. And so my way of coping with that wound was that, to the degree that I felt that abandonment and that low self-worth was the degree that I decided to go out into the world and just obsessively search for achievement. And so, the number of gold stars I was able to get that looked really shiny and sparkly on the surface was the degree to the trauma that I had to help me to try and feel good about myself. And so I think that's really an important thing for us to remember is that we don't really know what is going on with people when we're comparing ourselves to them. And, even though things looked really great for me, that was really just a facade so that I could feel good in the world. It's sort of like chasing a moving target so that I could feel this kind of false sense of safety and belonging. But underneath all that, I was really ashamed because I couldn't understand why I wasn't so happy, why I was still numbing, why I was falling into these kind of really deep bouts of depression.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And again, so interesting around when we compare ourselves to other, we really do, like you said, have no idea what they're going through. So I think that's really great to call out. And then, so speaking of which, so then you did ultimately recognize that, okay, I need to change my life. And
Mhm.
you came into the coaching world and you've called out a few aspects about this concept of the map of consciousness and
Yeah.
being able to pull yourself from that addictive approval seeking into states of courage, different, more positive states. Just for our audience to understand a little better, can you explain a little more about the concept of what the map of consciousness is?
Yeah. So this really came around, I would say, the COVID years when we were seeing so much polarity and I was having so much trouble kind of understanding and coping with it. And I remember there was something I was just led to get into this one book by David Hawkins called Power versus Force, which is the first book that he wrote. But he explains this concept called the map of consciousness. And essentially, what it is that has, and David Hawkins, by the way, he died in 2012, but he's this really incredible sort of spiritual teacher and also scientist. He's a physician, he was a physician. He pioneered something called orthomolecular psychology, which basically is the idea that certain types of psychological issues could be even reversed through just paying attention to the chemistry in the body. And so he's the real deal. Like I think he pioneered that work with a Nobel laureate. So he is the real deal, but he basically found that consciousness can be calibrated. And what he did was he created a map where he was able to, using kinesiology, which is essentially muscle testing, he was able to assign sort of a value to certain energetic states. And so I actually have a visual here.
Yeah, share it.
So you can't really see it very well, or maybe I don't know that this is actually going to work for our purposes. Oh, darn it.
I can pop in a
Yeah.
PDF or graphic.
Perfect. So this is, I don't know why I have my video settings so that this is blurred, but this is basically these right here. You can't read that, but these are energetic states. And so it reads shame at the very bottom, guilt, apathy, grief. These are the red in the red, fear, desire, anger here in the orange, pride in yellow, courage. And now you can see here that there's a line and courage is here in the yellow. And then the energetic states that go above this goes to neutrality, willingness, acceptance, reason, love, joy, peace, enlightenment. And so what he's done though is he's calibrated these to certain frequencies. And essentially what he's saying is it's not about like, oh, there's something wrong with me if I'm experiencing fear, or there's something wrong with me if I'm having shame. I always like to share that because I think it's really important for us to remember that emotion carries wisdom. All of those emotions have information to tell us. For example, if we're feeling grief, then that is reminding us of things that we need to let go. And so, anger, where are we not advocating for ourselves? There's all kinds of things to learn from any energetic state. But what he says is that there's a threshold energy, and that is courage, where if you're anchored in courage or above, you're able to align yourself in the realm of power. And what that means is that anything that you do, you're creating a win-win scenario. It's like there's less resistance. And so this to me made a lot of sense because the other thing that becomes clear when you study the map is that depending on kind of where your hanging out, where you're anchoring, you're going to see the world through a totally different lens. So, for example, if someone spends most of their time in fear, which is really kind of many of us right now in the human experience, a lot of us are kind of anchored in fear frequency, we are going to see reality in a very different way from someone who's anchoring in courage or someone who's anchoring in love. And so for me during the COVID years, that helped me a lot because I could really see that, oh, people are literally seeing purple here and people here are seeing green and they just can't get together because they don't understand that they're anchoring in very different energetic states. But this starts to get really interesting when we understand that if we can, with intentionality, anchor into certain states, our whole reality can change and shift.
Mm. I love that. I love that, Amy. And that's so fascinating. It is very interesting. I think we are seeing more and more people that are scientific in nature, similar to you and me, who are starting to begin to really blend these paradigms of science and spirituality and seeing that there's not necessarily the contradiction that we've been told that there
Right.
is. But I do think, to your point, that it's very pertinent right now because we are in a, so just to call out the troubles of the day,
Yeah.
it's the beginning of February 2026 as we meet. And so there are a lot of folks really concerned about the ice, the experience of ice throughout the nation, and folks with views on both sides around immigration, around the response of ice, concerns about that. There's a strong aspect of concern about the political system, again, on both sides. And then currently we have the release of the Jeffrey Epstein files, and a lot of people feeling really concerned about something that we've all been aware of, this aspect of moral depravity all the way from the bottom to the top,
Mhm.
and the concerns about that. And so it is one of those things where there's a lot of people who are really troubled by certain things in the world right now, rightfully so. So I really love what you're saying about this aspect of courage opens up these next level states of consciousness.
Yeah.
In fact, even when you said that, I found just like a pang in my core, like in one of my
Mhm.
lower chakras, just
Mm.
about that truth that we really must choose courage in these times
Right.
because otherwise there's no solution. There's nowhere to go to. It's just more reactive thinking.
Yeah, it's interesting because, I am someone who, for years and years and years, I spent a lot of time in the advocacy organizations. I worked for a humanitarian aid organization. I did a lot of advocacy work myself. There was just a lot of action that I took around just justice and humanitarian work. And I think all of that is kind of how I felt that I was able to contribute or make a difference. But what I experienced over and over again was just this feeling of kind of just banging up against a wall. It just felt like nothing ever changed. The organization that I worked for years later, I learned was it was an organization that was led by someone who was taking part in some of the most horrendous things himself. So it was like we were seeing just darkness and corruption inside some of these agencies, some of these people who are associated with some of these places. We're seeing that in the world now, people we trust that we've put on pedestals that aren't really living up to that at all. In fact, we're seeing a lot of dark stuff being revealed. And so it always reminds me of the expression that Gandhi is attributed to Gandhi. It's like you have to be the change that you want to see in the world. And I was like, what does that even mean? Be the change that you want to see in the world. And it wasn't until I really started to immerse myself in the work of David Hawkins and the map of consciousness that I actually started to understand what that means and what that looks like on a very practical level. Because first of all, when you're stepping into courage, courage doesn't always look like what you think it looks like. Sometimes we see and we have this stereotype that helping make the world a better place has to do with getting out there and being loud and shouting and holding up signs and demonstrating in certain ways and things like that. But courage doesn't always look like that. One of the, I think, most important kinds of courage is just this willingness to tell the truth to yourself. And that's what, as coaches and a lot of us who are in the healing professions, that's what we're asking our clients to do. That's what we're creating space for our clients to do, is just to tell the truth, just to be honest and courageously look at, what is real for us in our experience. And so many of us, because we're living in such a chaotic world, it's so hard for us to sit with what's, true for us because we're coping by just shaming other people, calling people out, canceling people, making it everybody else's fault, right? We're numbing out, we're disassociating, we're consuming a lot of infiltrated content that's being fed to us in the media, in my opinion. And so it's like we're constantly being, I guess, tempted into, not sitting with just courageously looking at how is this a mirror of my own energy? And so courage can be, very subtle, but really just being willing to, say, gosh, this really triggers me. And instead of that's because everything else is wrong, people are doing something wrong, the world is wrong. What is it about me and what's inside of me that is being mirrored or reflected out in the world? And so courage is the threshold energy where if we can start to just be willing to look at what's true. So in a coaching session, what that could look like for me is if I have a client who's believing a thought that's I'm not meant to express in my authentic way, right? And really looking at that thought and saying and questioning, is that really true? What happens when you believe that thought? What happens when you allow yourself space from that thought? That's a way of just being courageously honest. And so I've really learned that the more I can show up and just look at what's activating my nervous system, what's triggering me, and really start to just devour that for whatever it is that I need to learn about myself so that I can be in a more regulated state and more in my heart. Because the more I'm in my heart, the more then that I'm acting and behaving and making choices and saying things and consuming things that are allowing me to stay in a regulated state that then will ripple into my relationships with my children, into my relationships with my clients, into my relationships with how I treat strangers, right? And so it really is a grassroots effort. And I think we're so used to just asking and expecting other people to solve all our problems. And I really think it does start with us, and it starts with courage.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think those are great points. And I think it does, what that calls to mind for me is I feel like our one tendency that humans have is we get addicted to certain energetic states on this map.
Yeah,
And then we seek out information that validates that.
right.
So that way we can have that same cocktail of hormones and all of it. Because there is the shadow side of it is that we will seek out material that reinforces our belief in
Yes.
this scary world such that we can stay in that
And
vibration.
that echo chamber.
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. And then so we have to see that in ourselves that it's like, okay, what part of me is motivated to seek out this information because I really want to make a change and I want to be an informed citizen. And then what part of it is that it's because it's actually reinforcing this state that I'm
yeah,
addicted to.
yeah.
And I
I
do
love
think
that point.
yeah. Yeah. And I love what you said about, for example, this idea of because it's like, okay, if we have decided from a place of wisdom and discernment about what are the actions that I'm going to take to help improve the situation, and we've decided about how much information I want to consume to be an informed citizen, well, then beyond that, anything beyond that is sort of like, I mean, forgive me, but I've heard it called mental masturbation, where you're
Mm,
not actually helping anything. You're not helping the situation, you're not helping yourself. And in fact, your point about, well, you're just keeping yourself in this low level
mm,
such that then when your kids come home from school, now the parent that they have is a parent that's
yeah,
distracted, a parent that's, maybe feeling that kind of low level depression, irritability, et cetera, et cetera, and the ripple effect that has. So it actually does have a negative effect as opposed to, again, some people thinking it's a positive, it's important, it's
yeah.
necessary. Otherwise, I'm a bad person if I'm not staying on top of all of it.
Yes. I think so many of us think that the way to be a responsible citizen is to just continue to consume all this fear porn. And it's
Yeah.
like, I just want to normalize it though, because you use the word addiction, and to some degree, I agree with that. But I also say that anything that's like if you're like, say, for example, you're feeling a lot of fear, which a lot of us are. If you're paying attention to what's going on in the world, it's really dysregulating and it can really activate our nervous system, especially if, we have had trauma in our early experiences. And so it's normal for your nervous system to be activated right now. But if you are sort of unconsciously just kind of hanging out in fear, what can happen energetically is that then notice that you're more likely to respond in anger to something. And then when you're responding in anger to something, right away you start to feel ashamed for that. And then when you're ashamed about that, you start to feel grief or sadness or guilt, right? And so it's sort of like it becomes this really vicious cycle that kind of traps us, sorry, in heaviness. And then it becomes hard for us to escape that. And so that is why I feel like I'm such an evangelist for this work, because if you're aware of how this plays out, then you can start to ask yourself questions like, what does it look like for me to respond from this courageous place? What does courage look like for me in this circumstance? You can ask yourself, what does neutrality look like for me to, because personally, I think neutrality is the most receptive state. And so if you're able to kind of hang out on both sides of the algorithm, right? Or you're able to just, we can't be afraid and curious at the same time. And so
Mm.
if you're able to just, start to, with intentionality, turn towards some of these other free energetic states, it allows you to see the world from a different lens. And then that's what can help the nervous system to feel safer, to be able to spend more time in states like courage, in states like neutrality, in states like acceptance, all the way up to love, which, we like to make that a Hallmark card. Valentine's Day is coming up. But love is logarithmically the most incredible frequency. And in David Hawkins' work, he says that one person who can anchor into love frequency has the power to offset 650,000 other humans who are anchored in the state of fear. And so that is what Gandhi meant, in my opinion, when he said, be the change that you wish to see in the world, because David Hawkins has scientifically proven that if you can find your way into a more loving state, that is actually how you start to change the world. I don't know anybody who's been able to change the world but just hating on it more, by shaming it more, by blaming it more.
That's so beautiful. And I think that exactly to your point, I want to circle back to something you said earlier because I think it's worth it to flag is that there's nothing wrong with experiencing shame, fear, grief, sorrow,
Yeah,
anger.
we're in it. It's like it's happening, we're dealing with it right now. We're seeing it. I think we're supposed to see it. I think we're
Yeah.
supposed to, you could see there's a lot of stuff going on right now that is really activating a lot for all of us. And it's going to continue to, because I personally think it's showing us our shadow. There's an opportunity there. There's a choice point there. Are you going to shut down? Are you going to just go deeper into blame? Are you going to go deeper into shame? Are you going to go deeper into self-loathing, numbing, addiction? Which, we all do it. We all just need to do some Netflix binging and having a glass of wine sometime. And like, there's no judgment there. But what I want is to help people be more conscious and intentional that you have another choice. And the other choice is that these circumstances are showing you something about yourself that will help you to evolve and to be able to be in a place of power, because we can't change circumstances. All we can do is manage how we're able to navigate those. And if we can be more intentional about where we're hanging out in terms of energetic state, the more we can navigate those circumstances from a place of power.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And it's like, okay, the states themselves are not, it's not like it's bad to experience that,
Yeah.
but then asking yourself, well, do I want to live here?
Yeah.
And then that's where a lot of people are stuck, is they are living in the fear, living in the shaming.
Yeah.
And so to your point, you're actually not able to really be effective from that place. And so making a conscious choice to move up to the higher state of consciousness, and specifically I love how you mentioned that courage is the
Mhm.
access to the higher states.
Yeah.
Because I also think that even as we are experiencing emotions from these things that are happening, for example, Epstein.
Yeah. I've been pretty far down the Epstein rabbit hole. It's pretty horrific. I think there are going to be things that are coming out are going to break people's brains, but I do think that my perspective on it is that, we have to see the rotten foundation in order for us to build, or first of all, in order for us to heal, but also for us to build something new from that. And it's not easy, but the more that we can address these things from that point of courage, the more we're going to be able to position ourselves to actually create something new from that, that from the horrors of what's coming out right now.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And so speaking of which, then you mentioned this aspect of one person operating from courage then can sort of counteract thousands around them. One person operating from love can counteract 650,000. How did he come to that? What does
Yeah.
that mean? Is that from like an energetic state? Like, how does that work?
I don't know what the mathematics are on it. I mean, he's the scientist and that's his research, but I resonate with it. And interestingly, he's been able to kind of map energetic state to values. So, for example, shame would map to the value of 20. Love would map to the value of 500. And this is in hertz. And so I don't really understand it, but he does say that anytime you're able to anchor into, say, go from like an energetic state of fear to an energetic state of courage, which is at 200, that shift is logarithmic. So we're not just talking about going from like, say, 100 to 200. We're talking about to the power. So it's a logarithm, it's an exponential increase in our ability to navigate reality from a place of power. And so he's been able to then extract the math in terms of how he comes to those numbers. But I think it's pretty compelling.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's exciting because
Yeah,
similar to when nobody knew what electricity was, it didn't mean it didn't exist. It
right.
meant that we had to take those steps to be able to discover and harness and be able to work with it. And so I
Yeah.
think a similar thing is happening with consciousness right now that we're starting to see that simply because we don't have the ability to understand it from a layperson's perspective doesn't mean that we never will. So, with that said, one thing I love about you is that you can be very esoteric, philosophical, and yet I know that you're also very much helping people in the day-to-day reality. And so, for somebody
Yeah.
who it wants to shift to courage, for example, that person that's watching that's like, I am so afraid, I am in those negative states. What
Yeah.
are some practical ways that they can shift into courage and some of these higher states?
It's interesting because I feel like the map of consciousness as a model can apply to so many areas of life. We were talking about it in terms of kind of how we're dealing with things in the world, but I'm also working on how to apply the map to, for example, I mentor a lot of coaches and I work with spiritual entrepreneurs, and I'm working on kind of a new iteration of how I help coaches with their business and how they want to express and create from this authentic place. And as I said before, a lot of us get really stuck around being seen. And so there's this term that I'm using now called action to effort ratio. And basically the idea is that, say for example, you were a coach and you wanted to like get people interested in maybe learning about your work or signing up to talk to you about maybe working with you, and you decide you're going to go to one of those cringy like networking events, right? We've all done. And so say, for example, you go in and you're in a frequency of shame, and you go into that event and at a frequency of shame, you're anchoring into a perception where it's like, I don't know why I'm even bothering, nobody's really gonna care about this. I might as well just go home, things like that. And so someone approaches you They want to have a conversation with you. You probably don't even like respond to them, let alone give them a business card, right? Because you're in shame. If you're in fear, then you're unlocking a different timeline. So if you're going to that same event and you're anchored in, say, courage, for example, your attitude might be, well, I don't know how this is going to go, but I'm going to try it. And, I don't like when you talk to someone and be like, I don't know what they're going to say, but I'm curious to see, how this plays out. So I'm going to share what I'm working on and, just do that, even though, and a lot of times with courage, it doesn't mean that things aren't uncomfortable. And I think that's really important for us to realize is like courage doesn't mean, otherwise it wouldn't be courageous, right? It's like, it's often quite uncomfortable. But from courage, you're willing to engage it's a very mobilizing energy. And so that's why I think it's so important. Whereas, say, for example, you go to that same meeting and you're anchored in willingness. And then it's like you are like, I don't know, like there's just a whole different, every energetic state is going to unlock a totally new timeline, which then will unfold from there. And so, how do we get in courage? I think courage is the state where you just ask yourself, like, what does it look like for me to engage my life, my choices from this place? And when you understand that courage doesn't mean that discomfort isn't there, then you start to become more willing to do that. And so I think the first piece of advice that I would just offer, and this is why it's so exciting for me to get to talk about this in forums like this, is just that awareness, right? Because so many of us are not conscious to why we are stuck, kind of cycling in fear and anger and, shame, right? We don't know, we're not conscious of it. So the first piece is that awareness, that intentionality, and then just asking the question, what does it look like for me to engage this circumstance from a place of courage, which then reveals a whole new timeline of,
I love that. And I think that's really helpful because exactly that a person might not recognize that how much their own state of consciousness is impacting the way they're presenting themselves, what they're saying. And so if you can recognize the state of consciousness, then you can start to generate something else such
yeah,
that it informs all of your actions.
yeah,
So that same person that's always like, why do I even go to these networking events? They never turn into anything. It's like,
yeah,
well, because you're coming at it from this state of shame,
yeah,
whereas if you were coming at it from the state of willingness, then you would have more of an open orientation, you'd be more
yeah. You're
enthusiastic.
talking enthusiastically, you're excited to share, you're willing to do the thing that really lights you up, you're talking to other people about it. And so then they're interacting with you in a totally different way. And that's kind of circling back to that concept of action to effort ratio. So you could be going to an event and being in a state of shame, or you could go to that same event and you could do it from a state of, say, courage or willingness. And it's sort of like that logarithmic example that we talked about with love frequency. It's like, you start to see that your impact is logarithmically different when you can anchor into certain frequencies of consciousness. Your impact just it's completely changes the game. And that's what I'm starting to teach entrepreneurs and coaches.
Okay, that is so cool. That's so cool. And you're exactly right that, for example, if you are, yeah, if you're coming at it from that state of fear or shame, and then, but you're like, oh, I'm going to force myself. I think this also
Yeah.
probably orients around force versus power.
Yeah.
But then I'm going to force myself to go to this event. I'm going to force myself to do this follow-up. I'm going to force myself to do all these things. That effort is, oh, it just feels like you're pushing a boulder up a hill. But when you manage your state such that then you're coming at it from a place of, oh, you're excited, enthusiastic, passionate, willing, open, then it just feels like, oh, everything's natural, everything's easy.
Yeah. And it's interesting. It's like, I love that spiritual tenet that says, as above, so below, because we were talking about how this plays out in the external world and how we're seeing all these rotten foundations that are crumbling right now. And they have to, so that something new can be built from that. And I really see that that's the case inside of all of us as well. It's like, if you think that the way to navigate your life from this place of shame or from this place of fear, from this place of force, we're starting to see that those things are just not working. Whatever is happening in terms of this energetic shift of consciousness in our humanity is showing us that we can't keep going from these kind of rotten foundations thinking that we can create what we want from that. It's where it's really starting to be shown that just doesn't work anymore. And so I really love the map of consciousness explained by David Hawkins as this resource to help understand how to work with that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think that even something within myself that I can see that maps exactly to what you're
Mm.
saying is I do feel like when I used to come from those places of more shame or fear of judgment, what other people might think, then for me, what would happen is an over explaining and overcompensating. Like, no, let me, any judgment that I'm afraid of, let me head it off at the
Right.
pass. And then therefore, I'm in this energy of overcompensation, which then they're left sort of kind of like, I don't know why she's rubbing me the wrong way. She's just
Yeah.
rubbing me the wrong way. And so then, therefore, they're going to associate my ideas with that. And the
Mhm.
ideas themselves might be great, but the energy with which I'm expressing them is off. And so
Yeah.
people are like, oh, that doesn't land, that weird coach shit. Like, I don't want anything to
Yeah.
do with it. And so we really must be very rigorous, kind of almost having like that energetic hygiene is what's coming to
Right.
me.
Ooh, I like that. Yeah, it kind of reminds me of that concept of apology energy. I think it was Nani who wrote that. But this idea that when you're apologizing inside around something, you're attracting attack energy. And it makes a lot of sense when you notice that, ooh, I'm explaining myself because I'm anchoring right now into fear and I'm seeing people as threats. And it's really interesting because I have really found that people are our mirrors. And so if you are projecting this fear energy, then people are going to come at you and play into that role, right? And so they'll have that attack energy. But if you're coming at it from, more of this, I'm in my heart, I'm coming, that's what I think is really where it's the sweet spot of where we want to be as creators, especially as coaches and individuals who are interested in evolving consciousness, our own and others. It's not about forcing anyone to see something. It's not about getting people to change. It's really about getting yourself to be able to be in your heart enough to express from that place of love, that place of devotion, that place of service. And we're able to access those states and unlock those timelines when we're more intentional about our energetic hygiene, as you say.
I love that. Yeah, that's very, very cool. And I know, so you talk about this, and I know that you support people in doing exactly this, in moving to these energetic states, in understanding how that impacts all of their work.
Mm.
And you actually have a community, the North Star Coach Mentoring Community. How does that work?
Yeah, it's a community inside Mighty Networks is the platform, but we have a lot of different things going on, but the biggest thing is that I created this because I've been a coach for 16 years and I've seen a lot of ups and downs, and I've mentored entrepreneurs and coaches and how to create financially sustainable businesses. But I created this community because I have just felt that I've been frustrated in what I've seen available to coaches. It's really easy to feel overwhelmed, get stuck in comparison. I think a lot of us who are coaches and spiritual entrepreneurs, we're also vulnerable because there are a lot of people talking about I'm making $20,000 every day with this, one campaign or whatever. And it's like I know for me, I ended up throwing a lot of money at a lot of different things. And I learned a lot of important skill sets. But what I was lacking was a community where I had access to a mentor that could help me feel like I just stay in the game because so many of us are doing this in isolation. And so I created this community that it would be something that would be doable at almost any budget, where people would have access to me every week in an office hours kind of call that we do, but also access to the community of people who are in there, and also just have access to resources so that you kind of know like what is the first skill set that I need to be addressing before because so many of us don't really know. And I know, speaking personally, I tried to throw it all up against a wall and ended up really, really overwhelmed and frustrated because my business still felt like a expensive hobby years later. So, I've really tried to create something that would address so many of the things that we need when we're building our business, and we want to do it from a place of authenticity. And so we also draw from the map of consciousness. We talk about courage, frequency. And as I said, I think one of my superpowers is being a courage infuser. And so, yeah, there's a lot of different pieces to it, but I try to create something that would be something that I would have wanted when I was building my business.
I think that's so great. And that is very needed right now because there are so many people, just like you mentioned, we're experiencing that inundation of the influencer era where everyone is saying, I'm making all of this money and
Yeah.
all of these things going on. And at the same time, a lot of fear in the market around people saying like, oh, the market's never been harder. It's never been a more tough time to be a coach. And so a lot of
Mm,
people just kind of navigating between these two of like, okay,
yeah.
what's available, what's possible. And it sounds like you kind of have this like sort of shelter in the storm of all of these different, all of the
Yes. I
noise.
like that. I like that. Definitely, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's very, very cool. And I know you take people through a 5-day courage challenge. Tell me about that.
Yes. So I created, so this is it's a free challenge that people can participate in. And it's really a way for people to start to learn what does courage frequency feel like. And so every day there's something really simple to do to grow your awareness, but also to put it into practice. And I host it inside my community. So there's also, I'm popping in there and cheering people on, but it's just a beautiful kind of real practical way to start using these principles and applying them into your life.
That's awesome. So great. I'm so glad that we had the opportunity to have this talk. I think I'm really struck by, again, that aspect of you know so much from that esoteric, philosophical,
Mm.
theoretical perspective, and yet you have these awesome ways to just help people ground it and say, like, okay, what's the one action? What's the one thing that you can do to make a difference? And so I think that's just it's a really fantastic skill set to have.
Thank you so much. I also wanted to just share that the other thing that I did was I created something called a frequency navigator, and it is an AI tool, but it's really cool because I have my thoughts about AI, but I figure, the more that we feed it our consciousness from these higher energetic states and participate it in that way, it is a consciousness. And so it's like if we're just leaving it to all of these thinkers who are using it for their corrupt purposes, then it's going to evolve in that manner. But if we're using it to ask the important questions that have to do with evolving consciousness, then it's going to reflect that. And so that's one of my intentions around creating the frequency navigator. But essentially, what it is if you're like dealing with something difficult in your life, you're really feeling stuck and you're like in shame or you're in fear, or, and you can kind of just go in and kind of type in whatever it is. And the navigator will tell you where it sounds like you're anchoring. And then the cool thing that it does is it offers you kind of, okay, this is what it looks like if you would be responding to this from courage. This is what this looks like if you were responding to this from acceptance, right? And so it kind of helps you to get better at being able to work with intentionality in anchoring into these different energetic states. And I actually use it myself. And I find that the more that I use it, the more I can just naturally kind of flip the switch. And I like to get quantum about it. I feel like it's like it unlocks a different timeline because different things then unfold when I'm interacting with reality from courage, neutrality, acceptance, love, right? And so it's a tool to help people kind of build that muscle.
Oh my gosh. Okay, that is so cool. That's very cool, Amy.
That's cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And I do think I personally feel with all of these, whether it's social media, whether it's AI, we have to be responsible for programming them and using them in such a way. I mean, as we know with
Yeah.
anything, money is a tool. It can be
Yeah.
used for nefarious, corrupt purposes. It can be used for the highest good. So
Right.
we have to be responsible. And no, that's really rad because I actually have to say, girl, yesterday I could have used that. Like,
Oh, you can use it starting today. The other thing too is I'll share the link. So this is kind of also a way for me to get people in my community. So, you sign up, you put your email in, and then it will share the access information. You do have to have a free ChatGPT account. But then I also offer a class that I teach that explains the map of consciousness. It's a shorter class that kind of goes into what it is and how it can be of use and service for someone who, say, is a coach or a spiritual entrepreneur. So there's a couple resources there, but you can get access to the Frequency Navigator that way.
Oh, I
And then
love
it will
it.
also lead you into the Courage Challenge eventually. So
Perfect.
it's
Okay,
all there.
perfect. It's all, I know, it kind of all works together, synergy. And yeah, no, that's awesome. That's very, very awesome. I'm telling you, sister, I literally yesterday I was like, am I angry? Am I anxious? Am I kind
Right.
of depressed today? Like what? I knew I was having a little something going on and I just went for a walk. I was like, I'm just going for a walk and
Oh, yeah. Just this somatics can do the trick, right? Just getting into the body.
yeah, totally. But it would have been so helpful to have the GPT and see like what's really going on with me.
Yeah.
So I love that. So Amy, so great to have you on. You're such a pleasure. And
Oh, likewise.
yeah, it's been wonderful to chat with you about this. And I do want to encourage everyone, definitely go. We will have the links for the Frequency Navigator GPT such that you can access that, as well as her additional links to learn more about the North Star Coach Mentoring and the 5 Day Courage Challenge. So, anything else you want to leave our audience with, Amy?
No, I just think it's been such an honor. I just loved sharing this topic. So I hope that maybe, I guess, one question to leave folks who are listening is just whatever you're dealing with right now, whether that's just all the frustration or, discouragement that you're seeing out in the world, or whether there's things going on in your own life, just asking yourself, what does it look like for me to approach that from a place of courage? Because that really is the threshold to accessing and navigating circumstances from more of a place of power.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful. That's really beautiful. Well, you've heard it from Amy. I want you to consider that today. No matter what you're going through, you do have the ability to access more empowered states, regardless of what the challenge is. So, with that said, thanks again, Amy, for being here.
Thank you,
My name's
Nicole.
Nicole. Yeah, absolutely. My name's Nicole Bell, and this has been an episode of the Soul Guided Book Club podcast. We look forward to seeing you next time.